Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to stay here so I can see my slides. I can also go there. It depends how good it goes. My name is Streefland, and I will kick off this session. And then then Steph will take over the final part of the session. And it's a GDPR, CCPA, LGPD, oh my, and basically it's about the pragmatic approach, how to secure an organization. And we do that in combination with Palo Alto Networks and TITUS. Stay a little bit here. And I always like to keep, you know what, I'm going to stay here because the slides are more important than me and it's easier. What you see is Albert Einstein, and this is one of the phrases I like because I like to keep it simple. And you will see that during my presentation that simplicity is key. Don't make it too complex, and that's exactly one of the things that a lot of people do with a GDPR or CCPA or any of the other things. They are, whoa, their hair is on fire, they are panicking. That's exactly not what we would like to see. This is the agenda for the today's session. I will start with an introduction, and then I will give you my pragmatic approach to security. I used to be a CISO for several companies before I was working for Palo Alto Networks. And based on that experience and also the work in Palo Alto Networks, I will give you a basic pragmatic security approach. Then I will talk very quickly about GDPR, CCPA and LGPD. And then I will hand over the floor to Steph, who is going to dive into the details about data security and what TITUS can do in this. Well, these are the two folks that you will hear from. My name, I'm a former CISO, as I told you, and I'm now the Chief Security Officer for Palo Alto Networks for Northern Eastern Europe, working from the Amsterdam office, covering the Benelux, Nordics and East Europe. And Steph is a former VP out of the tech industry, and he's now the co-founder and CTO, and he told me also CIO and CISO of TITUS. So we are the persons that are honored to give you the presentation of today. And as you know, and this is not new, but this is the introduction, the world is changing extremely fast with a lot of challenges. And especially for security professionals like you, we are facing a lot of challenges. We know everything is hooked on the internet. It's an interconnected world. IoT devices, there are more IoT devices in the world than people on Earth. According to some predictions and some research, in 2022 there will be 29 billion IoT devices in the world. And all those IoT devices, or a lot of them, will probably be using 5G. And all the IoT devices are probably not secure. So that's a challenge for us, security professionals. Another challenge is that there are only three kind of companies in the world. Companies that are in the cloud, companies that are going to the cloud, or companies that are thinking of going to the cloud. So every company is going to the cloud. And that's a challenge for you as a security professional. How to keep in control. Another challenge is, and there it is, compliance and regulations. But keep in mind, it's just a challenge. And it's not the main challenge, it's just one of the risks that we are facing. And another challenge which I want to mention is the automated threat. The bad guys are not sitting still, they are getting more and more sophisticated. These are the main challenges that we are facing as a security professional. And often, too often, security is running late. You guys must feel yourself a firefighter sometimes. Things go wrong. People make mistakes. That's what it is. The world is complex. So security is often running behind. And what you see is also that the CISO is overwhelmed. And I got the feeling. As a CISO, you got a lot on your plate. So you see a lot of things happening. And again, one of the things, compliance here, regulations. I keep on coming back on that. But also other things are very important. Lots of things. And most of the time, the CISO is reactive. This is the CISO. He's whacking them all instead of being proactive. That is what I felt in my beginning of my career as a CISO. I was running behind all the time and being reactive. So we have to change cybersecurity because you don't want to be the headline in a newspaper that your company or organization is breached or that you've got a security incident. So you have to change cybersecurity. And the way I always say, again, going back to Einstein, keep it simple. Start from the foundation. And where to start? Well, I say a pragmatic and effective security approach is needed. Why? Because otherwise we are drowning. We are drowning, we get an overload of information, reactive, we are not in control. We are not in the driver's seat. And that's what you have. So, and I always say security is about reducing risk. My definition of cybersecurity is start at the basics. And the cybersecurity is to reduce the risks for the business so that the business can do its business. Full stop. Don't make it more complicated than this. This is what you do as a cybersecurity professional. Start at the basics. Think about what are your core assets. Where are your core assets? Who has access to your core assets? Think zero trust, as we call it. So if you have a chance, visit the sessions of John Kindervek, our zero trust evangelist. He's the founder of Zero Trust. Think zero trust. Keep it simple. You have to mitigate the risks so that the business can do its business. That's what you're here of. Don't think in point products. Don't think in tools. Because that's what happened in the past. We got a problem, we bought a tool. We got another problem, we bought another tool, etc., etc. And that's not the way. We say security needs to be simple and we think in principles. These are the principles of security that we are using as Palo Alto Networks. These are the principles. And I don't want to mention them all, but the first one is also the most important one. It's about visibility. You need to be in control. You need to get visibility on all your applications, your whole network, even encrypted traffic, even your data in the cloud or in the mobile devices. Visibility, visibility, visibility. This is key. Reduce the attack surface is common sense, I think. We prevent the known threats because the bad guys are sophisticated, but they're also lazy. So what they've done before, they probably will do again. We know it, we block it. And if they're having unknown, if we see unknown threats, we translate them to known threats, what we do with Wildfire and our platform. This is how we do cybersecurity within Palo Alto Networks. And why is it so important? Because I want you to remember visibility. I'll come back to that later on. So what you have to do, you have to develop a simple plan. You have to say, okay, what's my current cybersecurity posture? What's my maturity? Am I here? And also, or somewhere else? And also, you have to decide, where do I want to go? What do I want to go there? Or perhaps there? And which timeline? I used 3 years. I told to my board, I said, we are now here, which is basically at the bottom, basics. And we want to go there in 3 years' time. You have to discuss that. You have to come up with a strategy, a simple plan. Otherwise, you're whacking them all. So what are the priorities that I will give to you? Those are the priorities that I did. But I will advise and suggest that you should do these. Because they are, again, simple and doable. The first thing you have to do, and that was also my question when I became a CISO, okay, how does our corporate IT network look like? And the IT manager said, well, that's a good question. I said, how many servers do we have? How many endpoints? He said, well, I don't know. You have to know it. You as a security professional have to know how your IT network looks like. You have to know where your data is. It's a requirement, coming back to compliance and requirements. GDPR insists on the fact that you have to protect personal data. So you have to know where your personal data is. Where does it reside? That's a fact. No way you cannot do that. You have to know it. Second thing is identify and prioritize your risks. You have to identify and prioritize your risks. Why? Because you are risk mitigating. That's why. And that's what you're doing. So those 3 steps is identify your IT network, identify your risks, mitigate them. It's that simple. Well, it's not as simple as I told you, but that's you have to keep in mind. The first thing, get to know your IT environment and data. Visibility, visibility, visibility. No way you have to say, if your board or if your CEO or CIO asks you, hey Fred, how many servers do we have? Where's your data? You have to know the answer. How many companies are plugging into our network? Third-party vendors. That's an interesting one too. You have to know it. Again, get to know your stuff. Don't assume. Trust, but verify. Second thing is identify and mitigate your risks. I have a whole session on risk mitigation and how you can do this and risk assessments. But the way how I did it, I put 10, 15 people in a room and I said, write down what are the business risks. And write down, also on the same sticky note, what is the probability and what is the business impact. So from 1 to 5. If it's a high probability, it's a 5. It's a low probability, it's a 1. High impact 5, low impact 1. So I got a list of 225 risks identified in my company. And with those 225 risks, they are valued from 25 till 1. I went to the board and I said, these are the risks, what do you want me to do with it? And they said, well, you're the CISO, you mitigate them. That's my job. So make sure that you know your risks in your company. So identify the risk values. And this is a simple, you can use any risk methodology, but please do a risk assessment. The biggest risks, or the biggest risk is not doing a risk assessment, but just doing security. And then I came up with a plan, a to-do list, so to say. This was my to-do list. And as you can see, it's not only Palo Alto Networks. You have to do more than Palo Alto Networks. I implemented the next generation firewalls of Palo Alto Networks in the beginning. But I also used other partners of Palo Alto Networks. Splunk, for example, Okta. But also TITUS. Hey, that's a good thing. So you can use other companies, and you have to, because not one company covers it all. Not one company can do it all for you. So you have to mitigate the risks. And this was my to-do list. And with that to-do list, I mitigated the risks. Everything I did on this list, it mitigated risks. So I went to the board and I showed them, this is what we are doing, this is the amount of risks that it is mitigating, and this is what it will cost you. I never ever had a discussion about budget with the CFO. Never ever. And that's what's happening. Looking at compliance, because I told you I come back to the compliance and requirements. As you can see, it's just one of the risks. It's just one of the issues, the challenges that you have. So please don't overdo it. Yes, it's important, and GDPR, the board understands GDPR because they've seen the fines that they can get. But please don't overdo it. Just treat it as another risk. But the good thing is about our combination today is that the combination with Palo Alto Networks and TITUS, you can mitigate the risks in this perspective. You can become compliant at the same time. Compliance and regulations. Again, one of the risks, an important one, but not the overarching mother of all risks. No, it's just a risk. And what you see, if you look at those three, and yeah, I'm an expert, I have to say, in GDPR. I know all the articles and recitals by heart. It's not fun, but I have to. The other two I'm not so familiar with, but they are pretty also simple to explain. And what you see is that the GDPR, this is what's in the GDPR. I don't go in detail about it, but it goes about personal data. Again, you have to know where it is, you have to protect it, and you have to report if something happens. And it does not only apply to European persons, European companies, European citizens. If the Bank of America or another American company has data of EU citizens in their IT systems, or they're selling businesses to the IT, to the EU citizens, they have to comply to the GDPR. So it's a global legislation, so to say. The other one, that's one more close by to the people here, it's the California Consumer Privacy Act. It will be in effect in the 1st of January 2020. Again, I don't go into details about it, also because I'm not familiar with this. But what you can see, has similar requirements than the GDPR. And then we have one in Brazil, the Brazilian General Data Protection Law. It's a GDPR look-alike, but much leaner. Anyway, it is just another compliance. It's just another risk that you have to mitigate. So, coming back to my takeaways before I hand it over to Steph. Yes, you have to take it seriously. You have to take security and privacy, in this case, very seriously. But please, don't panic. Don't overdo it. Don't overdo it. Use it just as one of the risks that you have to mitigate. Make a simple plan based on a risk assessment. Please do a risk assessment. Start your work with a good foundation. Treat compliance as just another risk that needs to be mitigated. So again, be serious about it, but don't overdo it. And don't dive into the details or assumptions, because there are so many people that ask you questions. When you are the CISO, when you're the IT security manager, they ask you the questions. Keep it simple. Also on the GDPR in this case. The GDPR doesn't tell you more than you have to know where your personal data is. You have to protect it with organizational technical measures that account for state of the art. That's basically it. It doesn't tell you exactly how you have to do it. So don't go into those details. And if you're not allowed to do anything because of the GDPR, that's, excuse the word, bullshit. The GDPR is a requirement, not an inhibitor. And that's the same for the CCPA and the LGPD. Same. And then finally, start with visibility. You are responsible for your security in your organization. Make sure that you know your stuff. When I was a CISO, I thought I knew it all. I thought I had 100% visibility. Until a former employee had built in a backdoor, a terminal management server, which I didn't see, which I didn't know. And guess what? I got a breach. Halfway my plan. That hurts. When you got a call at 3 o'clock in the night from your CEO, it's not funny. No visibility. Well, I had 99.9% visibility probably. You have to demand that you have the visibility. And that's exactly why I hand over now to Steph to talk about TITUS, because TITUS can help you providing that visibility. I will be here also for the questions, but Steph, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Fred. That was a lot of food for thought. So my name is Steph Charbonneau. I'm the CTO of TITUS, and I played many roles before. And I started off in this environment being a technologist, like you, practitioners. So yes, I'm wearing a suit today, but I love the technology underneath. And really, it's around protecting the assets that you're there. I've designed networks, so I understand the value of this technology that you're here for the next few days to learn about how to protect your environments and from attack. But what I saw was a miss on the other half of that is around the data that is actually flowing through. You're protecting from the bad actors, but let's talk about the assets you own, because things like GDPR, CCPA, and others, reality is they're going to come all kinds of different regulations over the next few years where that'll just be the norm. Now, who are people, maybe show of hands, people who are dealing with GDPR issues within your environments today, all right? Who've got a strong stance and they know what they're doing for GDPR and you're ready? Getting there, right? Now, it's been a couple of people, maybe people from overseas that come, or if you're dealing with European customers, the reality is that we're not necessarily shielded here. I know a lot of people have talked about, oh, this whole shield thing is protected, but reality, the intent is you want to protect the assets of you as an individual within those enterprise. And so now to get away, because in reality, Fred talked about the fact that you need visibility, that's very good, but in reality, you need to have a certain budget to be able to tackle a problem, and the conversations within the boardrooms are changing to, why am I doing this project? Why am I spending time and effort to deal with situation? What does GDPR mean for me? And talked about zero trust. I think those are great sessions with John is attending or is presenting. He had a whole philosophy around you are otherwise I think a comparison was you are a security guard that's in front of invisible data. So how are you going to protect that asset? I got some really good stuff, but I need to understand the data. So when you start, and they got a good publication from Forrester, which deals with this, and many other analysts, we start talking about privacy regulations and strategies that you're going to use for protection that are going to be important. So understanding the data, where it is, how it's being used, you need to know that first step before you can actually produce the right technology to try to protect that. So where my sensitive data is within your industry, that's what we all just talked about. So we struggled with that within the industry. There are many files out there that exist. They're in Excel spreadsheets, they're PowerPoint slides. All this unstructured data is floating through your network, coming from an on-prem situation onto laptops, through your mobile device, up to the cloud. And it's your job, because you guys are all guys and girls, folks, are security practitioners. They're there to, and you need to protect it. So where is it? So how do you identify it? If I was talking about credit card information, that might be an easy way to find it. I can go find some patterns in credit card information. That's pretty straightforward. But for personal data, that becomes a little bit more complicated. Is an email always personal? A lot of people struggle with that. It's email, it's a business email, or is it a personal one? Can I claim that back, or do I need to have it in place? These are all complexities around understanding the asset that you're working with to be able to identify it. Now, it doesn't have to be that complicated. I come from a world where I did a lot of work in governments and militaries and where they classify the information. In that world, it's one of 5 different buckets: public, confidential, secret, top secret. Those are really interesting buckets. Can we apply something like that for GDPR personal information? Those are not enough buckets. I need to know more information, more qualities about that data that I need to identify. And if I had things like this where you see confidential, public, internal, but I have stuff that's GDPR, or if I get into things that are applicable to CCPA, that it can be tagged that information, identify that information as it flows through your environment, then I'm in a better place. I can understand it. So I need to know what that looks like. So if I look through a workflow, data protection workflow for compliance, it's really in 3 different stages. So you talk, listen to Fred, take a simple approach, start through it, but in essence, we're talking about 3 different strategies. 1, I need to identify that asset. It is something sitting in a box in Dropbox, it's files, it's information flowing through your environment, it's emails. And then I need to go through a classification process to be able to identify that asset and to get it to a data protection strategy, right? So we spend a lot of our time, and when I talk about classification in the military context, that's something very static, very easy, maybe a little bit more complex for those who've served. But you need a way to identify the value of that asset through, we spend a lot of time working on a policy engine to be able to identify that based on some business requirements. For me, something is classified a certain way based on what that data is being used. And we've got all kinds of, how do I tag it so it's permanently classified, so as that data flows around, so around the use of metadata. Now, metadata is going to be very important for us as we try to understand our data for downstream technologies as well. Now, there are all kinds of data protection results or endpoints that we're going through, and then the one we're talking about here specifically for GDPR is around compliance. But really, we're talking about many other contexts within the data protection around data leak and other security outcomes that you need to have in place for your enterprise. So it's through this work process that we're going to help you identify and protect that information asset that you have within your enterprise. Okay. So where do I start? Now, it's typically a 3-step process as we engage with our customers. Because we don't want to necessarily boil the ocean, we want a pragmatic approach to identifying those things that are the most riskier data in your environment today. So if I take a look around the axis between the value of that asset and over time, what information is more important, the information that's being generated today, that email that your CEO is typing right now and about to hit send, that's probably the most toxic piece of information that could either hurt your entire environment. It's information that's being shared. So I need to worry about the stuff that's being generated today, and then worry about how you're going to tackle the information that's been sitting around for 5 years in those archives that I need to go back and take a look at. Okay? So from a strategy perspective, think about things I need to tackle first. Don't do the entire thing. We need to take a pragmatic approach to that process. Now I know the data I want to get to, the stuff that's being generated today, and I can start creating policies around how to identify that information. My proposal to you, that when we engage with our customers, we want to take advantage of the people who know the data the best. Who are they? They're your end users. Do you trust them? I'm at an interesting conference to ask that. Right? You are here to try to protect them from themselves. So we have to find that balance. So is my enterprise, my user base, okay to ask a lot of information about the data? Is it personal information? If I actually read all the articles about GDPR, there's like 25 different articles that you need to understand on how to qualify that data. Am I going to ask that of every single user? No. Start off simple. Ask them, is this personal information? Yes, no. That's a good start. And then we can start mapping that information to your policies. If it has personal information and I attach that to an email, I have a great opportunity to warn them. You were about to send something that was tagged as personal going outside of this environment to an external user. I have an opportunity to educate them. Okay. And over time, depending on the business maturity of your user base, you can get into something a little bit more complex about how to identify that asset. Now, there are all kinds of articles here. There's personal information. Is it personal information? Yes, no. But then what kind of information? Is it a name? Is it an address? And is there any very sensitive personal information around sexual orientation, so on and so forth? That's a lot of detail. The handling of personal information actually starts talking about that level of granularity. The reality is your user base is nowhere near ready to answer those questions. So you think about a process to be able to handle that information and mature over time. You know, what's the retention period of that information? Did I get them their consent to share the information? So think about a strategy where I can start off very simply around identifying something as binary as yes, no, to something that's more meaningful around the quality of that data. And then once I've come up with a strategy to identify the data, our philosophy is to tag the information with as much data as you can about that data. So on the screen here, you can see things like what personal information type. It's a name, an address, and so on and so forth. Does it have sensitive PII? Yes. Can I share? Did I get consent? So on and so forth. Because I can start identifying the type of data I have, irregardless of the policy that's surrounding it. GDPR today, CCPA about to come true. The next regulation is coming out as well, where I need to go find that data because my policies have changed. So if I can get to a point where I can put the right attributes on the information, I can go find it later on. We talk about the fact that we've got an insurance policy. I understand the data. Now that it's tagged, we can now take a look at some of the downstream technology can then act on it. And this is where a lot of work between ourselves and Palo Alto, for example, you're here to secure your networks. Think about the value of that technology having if it understands the data without necessarily scanning it, the performance through that process. Now, I talked about how to tag it with all the qualities on it. Can we automate that? We are technologists, security experts. Must be a way to automate this. Sure. And why do we want to? Well, the reality is if I only depend on my user who sits in front of a little training video, 12 minutes per year to understand what the latest compliance is, the reality is tomorrow they leave or 2 days later, they really don't understand it. It keeps changing, it evolves. New information, they have questions. So I need to be there helping. I need someone over my shoulder as an assistant working with data to understand that data because it's always evolving. So I need to get to a point to evolve to automate that process. And so can I automate it? Yes, there's all kinds of ways. We can start off by doing a manual process, but really we can automate it at creation. I save a document, I send an email. I have an opportunity to scan it and do stuff with it. Okay, great. Maybe I can suggest it. It looks like other stuff I've seen before. So I can play it back to the user, make sure I've got the right level of confidence that that is personal information or it's sensitive or it's got some IP for the organization. I can either automate it in Data in Motion. I download a report from Salesforce.com. Based on where it came from, based on content, I can automate that process. Or is it just the data at rest, that 5-year problem we talked about at the beginning, where the data exists, I need to go find that information and scan it and just tag it? That would be great. And we've got some great technology to help us in that process. But the reality is, to get automation to work properly, if I was talking about credit cards, that would be easy. Reality is personal information, it's a little harder. So based on the information you're trying to find, there are different technologies for us to try to automate that process. So the detection becomes harder based on what you're looking for. So from a regular expression perspective, that's fairly straightforward. I can detect information, that's great. Hey, I found a credit card. Do you really want to send that? It's pretty basic, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. As we take a look at things like machine learning, a lot of great advances, especially in security. Right? You are looking for anomalies in your network because there's no way you can watch what's happening on the firewalls to get a good understanding of what's happening. I need to look for things that are different. In machine learning for documents, a little bit different. I'm looking for things that are similar. Right? So I'm looking for patterns. So from a machine learning perspective, can I use this as part of the personal data detection process? Sure, let's take a look. There's something that gets us closer. But typically we'll use it for finding the crown jewels. This looks like a lot of IP that I create. It's something to do with a report. So can I use machine learning? Now, machine learning isn't something that I could just tick on a box. I'd love to sell you a product that says, yes, there's a checkbox, and I can go ahead and just like, hey, machine learning is turned on, we're getting investment, it's automatically detecting everything, and we're off to the races. Reality, it's a 3-step process. I just want a little bit of education for the group. Those who's delved into machine learning in your industries, in your workplaces? I've got the right room then, so this is good. Write this down. It's not a checkbox. The first step, and I'll come back to the strategy here, but the first step is I need to build documents that look like certain things. I need to build what we call a corpus. I need sample documents, sample emails that correspond to your specific industry, your workplace. Why yours? Because each company is different. What you consider sensitive is different than your competitor or your partner. Now, when we build a corpus, we design it to work against types of documents. Avoid getting into a mapping between a classification, if I'm going to one of the 4 buckets of classification, but really around, does this look like a press release? Does this look like a product design or a product update thing if I'm creating products, like a company like TITUS? And from there, we then use technology and SVM to be able to analyze bag of words and all kinds of different technologies there to build a model so I can play it back, build a mathematical examples of those documents, so when it sees it later, it can play it back. So I go through a process to be able to analyze that information, and then I map that into, once I get to the right results, and using SVM, I may only need 100, maybe 100, 150 documents to get to it, and then map it into a classification value set afterwards. No, for me, for my organization, a project update is an internal document. And then I can apply rules based on that. And really, the outcome from this process is to be able to go through where I want to drive confidence in automating. The detection, again, was the problem. How do I detect personal information? To get it to a point where it's going to play back to the user, this looks like things that I have before. It looks like there's personal information, yes, no. And I want to check in with the people because they have a good understanding of context of that information. So can I play it back for them? And really the outcome, if I can get good at this, and maybe there's a different threshold. Your threshold, depending on the risk, is it 90% accurate is good enough? What if it's 95? If it's 95, maybe I don't even ask the user, and the detection process can automatically just tag it and let it go. That'd be a great place for us to get to. But I talked about categories of data, press release. We get into personal information. The complexity of something that's personal is not just a word, not a bag of words. The fact that I say sciatica does not necessarily mean it's a health problem that I need to track and protect. It's around the context, what's being played around it. So there's a lot of great advancements. We're spending a lot of time in deep learning whether, from Google and others around the technology to TensorFlow and others, to be able to identify those assets that are going to be considered personal. Okay? So we're doing a lot of great stride in that space, and then stay tuned. But that's where we can actually get to more complex things where we can automate the whole process of identifying personal information. So until then, the right process is for us to engage with our users, maybe suggest certain things they see, and then they can play that back. All right, so we got to a point where we talked about identifying, putting enough metadata on those documents to be able to protect, identify the information when it comes to GDPR and other compliance. Once we take a look at identifying the assets, just think about when you're here for the next few days talking about the next generation firewall, whether it's Global Protect and Aperture. If I can start creating my GDPR-like policies based on the sensitivity or the identification of that data, you've got a great tool set to be able to apply the protection of that information, right? So if these documents, these cloud apps that you're working with, if it's unsanctioned, now all of a sudden it can say anything that has personal information is blocked. You cannot send personal data up there, period. And tolerated, then maybe certain things can go there, depending on the classification. If it's public, let it go. So certain data can go up to the different cloud environments. And if it's sanctioned, then personal information is great because they have the right policies in place to encrypt, to restrict who has access. I understand the business intent of the data while it's sitting up here. So all the different use cases we can bring together with the firewall, just blocking things that have personal information from leaving. Internal documents can be blocked. So you got a lot of power now that we've walked through the process of both understanding the data, so starting off with a solution like ourselves to be able to tag it and understand through the policy engine, to be able to classify those assets, and then looking at the best of breed to protect your assets as that data is actually flowing around in your environment. Does that make sense? Yes? So we talked about using state-of-the-art technology. Even GDPR talks about that, and that's what we're kind of describing through our session today. Some people will want to talk about having one solution does it all. Really, you're looking for the best of breed from a detection. It's a hard process. We spent 15 years doing that, and we'll continue to focus on that. And we really love the technology that's coming out of Palo Alto to address the protection needs. So just wrapping up in conclusions, I'd love to take some time. I want to make sure that sometimes there's 10 minutes to be able to ask questions, but really it's around the regulations that are coming down the pipe. They're inevitable. The French-Canadian in me is coming out. You need to have visibility into the risk. What is the risk of holding that information present? And if you don't have visibility, the board is going to be responsible for it. You got a great voice within the board to be able to come back and know that there's a requirement to understand the data. User awareness from both a security awareness, but also that they are aware about the data they're handling that's flowing around is going to be key. Machine learning around detection is a great process for us to move forward to help that user. They're great assets, but they also need help. Okay? And more importantly, as we turn around need to show an action plan for how are you as organizations dealing with the information that's coming in. You got privacy information coming in, personal information, and not just personal, but even around the intellectual property and so on that your organizations are creating. Okay. With that, I think I've allowed for about 7 minutes worth of questions. Fred, I'd like to welcome you back up to the front. And thank you when you're here for a conference, and thank you for coming here because we're kicking off the whole session here at Ignite. We're very excited to be part of this. We've dealt with a lot of enterprises out there dealing with their data flow through these great systems around Palo Alto to be able to protect it. So if you've got some questions and concerns, definitely reach out to myself. Love to get you in the right place, and we'll get to the question.